Who was Ronald Reagan? Who was Ronald Reagan? It was already dark, and the beach at Lowell Park was closed for the day. Dutch Reagan, the 17-year-old lifeguard, was helping and they heard muffled cries and splashing. A swimmer had sneaked into the park for an after-hours swim. Now he was in trouble, caught in the fast-flowing waters of the Rock River. Dutch peeled off his glasses and dived into the dark water. He followed the sounds. A desperate man was struggling to keep his head above water. The swimmer was so panicky that he tried to fight off his rescuer. Dutch was afraid the man would drown them both. At last, the swimmer was too exhausted to fight anymore. Dutch held the man's head out of the water and swam one-armed back to shore. "Pulled from the jaws of death," screamed the headline in the Dixon, Illinois Evening Telegraph. The paper called Dutch a hero, adding that he had saved 25 lives so far. Dutch Reagan worked as a lifeguard for 6 summers. For the most part, the job was not glamorous. Early every morning, Dutch had to stock the snack bar. There was no refrigerator, just 3 big ice chests, so he would stop at the ice house for a 300-pound slab of ice. After chopping the ice into 3 big chunks, he carried them one by one to the beach. No matter how hot it got, Dutch didn't take a swim. The rule was that the lifeguard never got his suit wet unless he was in the water to save a life. The Rock River was famous for dangerous currents. In the past, people had been swept downstream. They had gotten trapped in the sluice gate of the dam. It had been up to the lifeguard to dive around the dam and get the body. Dutch was proud of his work. Every time he pulled a swimmer from the river, he would carve a notch into an old log near his station. After 6 summers, the log had 77 notches cut into it. Patrolling the beach was hard work, 12 hours every day of the week, but Dutch enjoyed being responsible for the safety of the swimmers at Lowell Park. Many years later, when he was known as Ronald Reagan, he became the 40th President of the United States, but Dutch always looked back on his days as a lifeguard as one of the best times of his life. Chapter 1. A Boy Called Dutch. Ronald Wilson Reagan was born in Tampico, Illinois on February 6, 1911. It was a snowy day, and his father left the general store where he worked and made his way home through the snowdrifts. Jack Reagan ran up the stairs to his family's apartment, a 1-room flat on the 2nd floor over a bakery. When he saw his new son, he laughed. "Why, he looks like a fat little Dutchman." The nickname stuck. The baby was known as Dutch all through his childhood. Jack Reagan was a tall, handsome man who loved to tell stories and talk about politics. He was a good salesman, but every so often he would go out and get drunk. When Jack started to drink, he often ended up losing his job. Usually that meant that the family would have to start over in a new town. The Reagans moved a lot. Although this often made things hard on Dutch, when he was older, Ronald Reagan remembered how much he appreciated growing up in a small town. He said, "You get to know people as individuals. The dreams of people may differ, but everybody wants their dreams to come true, and America, above all places, gives us the freedom to do that." Dutch and his older brother Neil were always the new boys in school. This didn't seem to bother Neil. He would find a group of boys to hang around with. Dutch was more of a loner. He liked to hike along the banks of the Rock River, pretending to be a fur trapper of long ago. In one house the Reagans rented, Dutch found an old collection of butterflies and birds' eggs in the attic. He spent a lot of time studying them. Dutch's mother was Nellie Wilson Reagan. Nellie Reagan was a very cheerful person. She always said that God had a plan for her life, so there was no reason to worry or feel sad. Wherever the Reagans moved, Nellie always found some needy family to help. She even visited prisoners in the jails, bringing them apples and crackers. Nellie never seemed to notice that the Reagans were poor themselves. For Sunday dinner, Nellie would feed the family liver, not roast beef or chicken. Instead of hamburgers, she fried up patties made of oatmeal. They tasted awful. Years went by before Dutch figured out that Nellie served these meals because she didn't have enough money to buy anything better. As a little boy, he thought his mother was just a bad cook. When Dutch and Neil were little, Nellie read them stories every night. She would read slowly and point to each word as she said it aloud. By the time he was 5, Dutch was able to read the newspapers on his own. Dutch read a lot of books, mainly boys' adventure stories. He read novels about Tarzan, the King of the Jungle, and novels about some characters called the Rover Boys. Dutch also liked to draw funny pictures. He thought that when he grew up, he would like to be a cartoonist. Maybe he could draw his own comic strip. Jack Reagan was an Irish American and a Catholic, but he was not a very religious man. Dutch later joked that his dad was the kind of Catholic who gave up going to church for Lent. Neil usually followed what his dad did, so he became a Catholic too. However, Dutch decided to join his mother's church. It was called the Disciples of Christ. He was baptized when he was 11 years old. Nellie was against drinking alcohol. She even wrote a play about how drunkenness caused family fights. It was performed at her church. Although Jack Reagan promised to give up drinking, he kept going back to his old ways. Even Prohibition, which made buying liquor illegal, didn't change him. One day, when Dutch was 11, he came home in the evening and found his father passed out in the snow on the steps leading to the front door. Dutch woke his dad up and helped him inside. He was angry and embarrassed. What if the neighbors had seen his father drunk? When his mother came home, she sat Dutch down for a long talk. "Don't turn against your dad," she told him. "He has a sickness. He just can't help himself." Dutch tried to follow his mother's advice. Anger was just a waste of energy. He would try to think positive thoughts. Prohibition. During the early years of the 20th century, there was a movement to ban or prohibit the sale of beer, wine, and whiskey. Women's groups campaigned for prohibition along with other causes such as voting rights, and equal pay. A constitutional amendment to prohibit the sale of alcohol took effect in 1920. Americans did drink much less overall, but people who wanted to break the law could find ways to get around it. Gangsters smuggled in liquor from Canada. People tried to make beer and wine at home. Illegal saloons called speakeasies opened in the back rooms of stores, on dark country roads, and in other out-of-the-way places. Somehow the owners managed to stay one jump ahead of the police. Prohibition was supposed to cut the crime rate. Instead, it made organized crime more powerful. The experiment ended in 1933.